this Alice?
Hi.
This is Jennifer.
Hey.
Hi.
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 How are you?
Well, just having a lot of questions, a lot of information, has been coming to me, and I haven't talked to you since the day that I came, to Atlanta, and I just have some questions I have to ask you.
Okay.
Yeah. I'd like to ask you about my father's will, and was it probated? Because it was never read in front of anyone that I know of. So I needed to find out some information from you about that, because I've been learning about this stuff. I didn't know anything about it, but
About what will?
my father's will.
I didn't know anything about a will.
Okay, when we sat in the office of the funeral home,
Uh-huh.
your niece, Kwanzaa, mentioned that she read a will online.
Well, you need to call Kwanzaa about that.
Why would I need to call Kwanzaa?
I don't know anything about no will, Jennifer. You need to call Kwanzaa about that if you...
Kwanzaa wouldn't be a person that would,
she's
your niece.
I don't know anything about a will, Jennifer. Listen, I had more than Tom ever had, okay?
She's your niece, but I'm asking because...
Let me tell you something, Jennifer.
You killed my father. You killed him.
I killed your father? What you talking about, you stupid ass motherfucker?
You killed him, and God is going to deal with what you did. You gave him alcohol. I've heard all about what you've done.
I gave him alcohol.
Yep.
You are a sick motherfucker.
Okay, that's good to know.
I never had alcohol in my life.
I heard you were giving my father alcohol.
Who you heard that from? Let's get to the person you heard it from.
How about my dad being cremated against his religious... He was a Catholic. I don't know how you all decided to do that against a Catholic, but you're going to have to answer to God for what you did.
You're going to have to answer. You and your half-dead mother going to have to...
No, you're... Wow. Let's talk about this. You've been invited into my group chat. So that was my father's third wife, and it was very typical of the way that she has dealt with me. And it's been a rough 30 plus years of abuse that I suffered. This is a person who entered his life. I was at Spelman at the time, and I went away for the summer, a summer break. She wasn't in his life before I left for the summer. But when I came back, and my father would typically pick me up from the airport, and when I greeted my father, it was a woman there smiling like a Cheshire cat. And being a little too familiar with me, I didn't know who she was. When we went back to my father's house, the entire house was done over in a feminine way, like mauve, pink everywhere. So she moved very fast into my father's life because he had been divorced from his second wife, and that was the home that they shared. And this woman came in like a flood. And it began a competitiveness. She was competing with me. She was from Atlanta, a local. She hadn't attended college, but she had an insecurity about me attending Spelman. As you know, Spelman college students are seen as bougie, and people can assume that about a person. So I already had a disadvantage with her. She already made her mind up about me, and she treated me as such. So she came into the marriage bankrupt, living with her father, and she had no children, never married. She married in, her late years, 40s, I guess you could say. And my father and this woman, like I said, did not have children. I am my father's only child. So through the years of dealing with the abuse from his third wife, it was alienating because my father he wasn't strong enough to control the situation. And it got out of hand many times, where she tried to physically harm me. And as I'm analyzing the root cause analysis of how my father could have gotten caught up with this type of woman, because my father was tested as a genius. So you know how geniuses are. They're a little bit socially awkward. And he wasn't, somebody who had lots of women and stuff like that. I mean, he had his, share of admirers. But after his second divorce, he fell into somewhat of a depression. And I was in college, living my college life. So I wasn't there for him a lot. So in my absence, something I'm thinking about now, how did this woman put her hooks into him? And especially because this isn't the type of woman that I would have expected him to be with as a genius. My father and I, we had so many intellectual conversations, and he was a very adventurous man. He was a mysterious man, but he was adventurous, and I share that adventure. He got me flying lessons, and, we did a lot, and we talked about a lot of amazing things, and he also had a lot of amazing friendships. When this third wife entered his life, she caused alienation between my father and a lot of his friends, because his friends were not all black people, they were all kinds of people. And one thing I did observe from her is she didn't like white people. So she didn't like my father to have white friends. And also my father loved pets. He loved cats. And he couldn't have a cat because she didn't like animals. And I watched him change a lot. And whenever he would brag about me, being his only child, he would brag about me, and I would see that green-eyed monster rise up in her. And I took my dad to the side once and I told him, you have to stop bragging about me in front of your wife, because when you do that, I get abused by her. And he wouldn't see the abuse, or maybe he did, because as I'm analyzing my father, now that he's passed, he had a mother wound. And men that have a mother wound are very susceptible to these type of women. And observing their relationship, she infantilized my father. She called him Tommy. Tommy, Tommy. And it was constantly this Tommy stuff. But she didn't care for him very well. Also, I observed, she didn't cook meals. It was always eating out, fast food. And I know that had a detrimental effect on his health. She didn't clean the house. It was always nasty. And she abused his only child. And I'm not typically a fighter. I became more of a fighter later in my years. But I endured her abuse, and it was great. She would typically slander my mother, my father's first wife. And my mother is the traditional, like, trad wife. When she married my father, she was a virgin. And she cooks and cleans and everything traditional. Unfortunately, it didn't work out. And it's a long story that I'm writing a book about. But I just wanted to share that I believe that my father, being that he dabbled in things, okay? And I want to talk about love spells and roots and witchcraft. Now, my father and I, we lived in Cuba when I was a little girl. We lived in Cuba 2 years, and he worked for Fidel Castro's Academy of Science. My father was a chemist. Hence, you will see me drinking from chemistry glasses. I've been doing this ever since I was little. I would spend time in my father's laboratory at the state capitol in Atlanta, and I would always get the chemistry glass and just spend so much time with him. We had an amazing life. But it was unfortunate that we were alienated because of his third wife. I stayed away somewhat. I would come around, but I couldn't endure all of the abuse. And especially because my father didn't protect me from her. But I understand that. I forgive my father. I understand why he got caught up with this woman. And I want to talk about, again, these love spells, because this is something that I notice is being discussed in the culture. And maybe this can be a cautionary tale for a young man, for a mother who has sons, to put those prayers over your sons that a woman like this will never enter their life. And I will pick up the love spells, witchcraft, and roots in the next one. So I want to talk about the dabbling into the occult. And a lot of people do this innocently, but they don't realize the consequences of it. And when my father was in between marriages, he didn't leave his wives because he was Catholic, so he didn't believe in divorce, so, there's that. But he wanted a woman to marry. He wasn't into dating and all of that stuff. So I knew that he was sort of courting some women. He had gone back to Philadelphia to some of the women he knew in the past. And also there was a woman that he left behind in Cuba named Carrie. And he had asked me to go to Cuba on a little mission to find Carrie because he wanted to bring her back here and reconnect with her. And they had reconnected, but it's a long story. I'll have it in the book, okay? She lives in Miami. Hey, Carrie, if you're out there, hello. She was a beautiful woman, and she treated me like her child. She was like a motherly woman while I was in Cuba. So I really have great memories of Carrie. Now, in Atlanta, there is a big Cuban community. And when my dad was divorced in high school, that's when the divorce happened, when I was in my junior year of high school. And we would go to a Santera, and she lived in this area of Atlanta where there were a lot of Cubans. And we would spend a lot of time at her home. And she was wanting me to study under her as an apprentice. And there were lots of people, I remember, coming in and out of her house. It was like Grand Central Station. And one of the things I remember, people would come with requests to reunite with a lost love. And she would do rituals. They would go down in her basement and they would do these love rituals and things like that. So that was one of her biggest services. And my father, I'm now wondering if he had done some sort of love spell, love ritual, something to attract someone into his life. And that's where I want to talk about that. I believe that when we dabble in things like that, outside of what we have been prescribed boundaries, those are the children of the Most High Yah. We are not supposed to dabble. Now, that's for other people. I'm not going to judge anybody. If that's your culture and those are your gods, then that's fine for you. But my tribe, we are not supposed to have other gods. So I'm wondering if he had done a love spell, because I believe these things backfire and you will attract somebody that is going to be destructive. And that is what I believe happened with my father. He attracted someone very destructive. And I also have a belief that she practices also a form of witchcraft. And I have a lot of reasons for why I believe that. She had done so many things to me over the years, lots of manipulative things, calling my job, talking to coworkers. I used to work in big pharma. And my coworkers would tell me, your dad's wife, your stepmother, I don't call her my stepmother because she was not motherly. My dad's second wife, I call her my stepmother because she was motherly towards me. So his wife would call my coworkers and she would do a lot of things, including, I believe she did things with my finances. She did things with my health. I wound up in a hospital in Chicago when I was going to visit my godfather, and I wanted to visit Gary, Indiana, where I was born, because I was doing research for my book. And my trip up to Chicago, I became deathly ill. Now, she and my father had dropped me off. I had taken a bus, you know, the mega bus. I was being very frugal. And they dropped me off, but it was a lot of weirdness that happened with her. And again, this is going to be in my book. But I ended up in the hospital when I arrived to Chicago. And I was in bad shape. But the thing about prayer, I've had a lot of prayer over my life. And I've been in situations where I shouldn't be here today. I can name things, numerous things that have happened. And I believe that prayer, my mother has told me that I have been prayed over so much. Prayers from all over the world. When I was kidnapped and taken to Cuba, there were prayers globally for me. And I survived a lot of near-death things. So I believe that, again, the dabbling comes with bad consequences. You know, a man can attract a witch, or a woman can attract a warlock into her life. And the way that my father's third wife alienated me and my father, she caused alienation between my father, including my daughter. She got involved in a custody battle that I was having. She paired up with my ex-husband and his family. And they did things that were unbelievable. Unbelievable. Like I said, it's been 30 plus years of abuse. And when my father died, he wanted to spend time with me. He was desperate to spend time. He couldn't drive, his eyesight was diminished, his hearing was diminished. He was begging people to bring him to me, is what I've learned. And people failed him. And she did not want him to come to see me. And her family, which my father was at enmity with, her family had a lot of influence over his final years. Her nephew had even come down from Virginia, and I'm hearing this now, driving him around to change his will. Yeah, that nephew ended up dying recently, like last month. He died very mysteriously, strangely. But she had named him to be the executor. And now she has a niece whom my father, he expressly did not want this woman, her niece, to be involved in anything to do with his estate, his money, anything. But she ended up making a decision with his wife to cremate him, and he was Catholic. Her niece said that she read my father's will online. At the time, I was going through so much shock and trauma, I didn't even think about the logic of that. And they quickly cremated him, no service, and he was loved by many. A lot of his friends from high school and college are still alive. He would have probably been better served to have a memorial in Philadelphia. But he was cremated the next day. Everything was quick and rushed. No service, really, just janky stuff. For a man so great to have nothing done for him. And then to have all of this gaslighting around his will. Because I want to say, I'm not after money. There are things that I want, like pictures and documents. My father did a lot of research into our family line, and I have nothing. Other people I've heard, they drove off with U-Haul trucks. You learn a lot about people when someone dies. And I've never liked how people become greedy and they want to trade places with people. And that's a dangerous thing for them, because if you are a child of the Most High Yah, Mosaic law applies. And you cannot steal someone's inheritance. You cannot mess around with God's law. He's serious about it. And that's what I believe. Now, my father, unfortunately, ran out of time. He was trying to spend time with me. We spent some time, and he began to tell me things that he hadn't told me, secrets. And he had a lot of secrets. And he was robbed of time. I remember one phone call where he told me, he said, Alice has been a snake to you. And he started just admitting maybe he did observe the abuse towards me from his third wife. But he called her a snake. And I heard her in the background. She would crash out in the background. He couldn't even have phone calls in private, even with his friends. They report that she was always hovering around. And he would sometimes have to make phone calls when she went to the store. And he called her the warden. And that's really sad, the warden. And I heard her in the background crashing out like usual. And she said something that was very chilling. She said, well, I guess Jennifer, that's how she talked, I guess Jennifer won. Can you imagine? She said, I guess Jennifer won. What did I win? Nobody wins in this type of situation. But it was always a competition. And I wasn't in competition. But she infused competition from the start when she met me when I was attending Spelman College. She was competing with me. And it was very uncomfortable. And for her to say I won is very telling. But my father didn't have peace in his last days, and that's very sad. One of his friends reported to me that he was at my father's, he was in the hospital room when he was in the hospital, and my name must have come up. And he said that my father's third wife crashed out. She was cursing and calling me names. By the way, she has been overheard by several people doing the very same thing. When my name comes up, she would just slander and curse and crash out just over me. Mind you, I don't know really what I've ever done to this woman. And I'm glad that my father didn't have children with this woman, because things would be much worse. But time is a valuable thing. I think about that song by Linkin Park. In the end, it doesn't even matter. And that's for somebody who has practiced witchcraft and control and domination. This is a woman who claims my father had nothing. She had more than him. What kind of woman and wife talks that way, who's been married to a man 30-something years? It's a competition with him as well. She came into the marriage bankrupt, living with her father in her 40s. And she's getting a man, and she's the third wife. And she always had a resentment towards my mother. My father would often want to apologize to my mother and make amends, and that would make her angry. She didn't want my father to seek forgiveness from my mother. She hates my mother because my mother was the first wife, I guess, who produced children. He didn't have children with the second wife, and neither the third. And it's sad to me that he didn't have peace. She was slandering me, and he didn't step up. He didn't step up as a man, unfortunately. And I know the reason why again. I can forgive and understand why. His mother died when he was 8 years old. He became an orphan, foster care, just a lot of trauma and abuse in his life. And I have to look at the totality of my father. And I know he would not have wanted this to be the way it is. Again, when I hear about people finding money all stashed around his house, and they're enjoying a lot of things from what I'm hearing. For me, I didn't want those things. I didn't seek after that. I want things that are more tangible, that pictures, like I said, in books and writings and his artwork. He was a self-taught portrait artist who had pictures hanging in the White House, in the Capitol. He did a portrait of Amy Carter and presented it to Jimmy Carter and Rosalind. He was that kind of guy. And that's why I'm writing a book, because I feel the need to redeem some things. I want my father's bloodline and his legacy to be preserved. I have grandsons, and it's only fair that they know who their great-grandfather was. And I want them to be very careful when they select a woman. Very careful. We've seen things that are in the Bible about Jezebel. And that's who I think of, Jezebel. Very cruel woman, destructive, wanting their own way. When I hear this woman, his third wife, talk about he didn't have anything, that's gaslighting. My father had a lot. When she came into his life, she wasn't required to pay one bill. My father allowed her to get on her feet financially after being bankrupt and living with her father. By the way, she calls me a loser. That's the word she loves throwing at me. I'm a loser who hasn't accomplished anything. But we know about projection, right? So she tells me that I had more than your father. How is that? She had more than him. He allowed her to come up and stand up financially and get ahead in life, because I guess she was just looking out for herself. And for her to throw that in my face and say she had more than my father, and she went and listed off I have a Mercedes, or I have this and I have that. Okay, fine. But that is such an evil and cruel thing, is to talk about my father had nothing. I don't believe that. My father was very thrifty. He had savings. He hardly even cashed his checks from the state of Georgia. He would just compile things and let it accrue. He was very frugal, but he allowed her to come up. And this is the thanks that she repaid him. She dishonored my father greatly. And I will thrive, continue to thrive. And the Lord God, the Most High Yah, will prepare a table in the wilderness, in the midst of my enemies.